For as long as I can remember, New Year's Eve has been a big deal in my family. I suppose that's not all that surprising. It is with most families, after all. You'd have to be pretty cynical to not think of New Year's Eve as a big deal, unless, of course, it's for personal or cultural reasons. But that goes without saying. My point is, New Year's Eve is a time to share love, give gifts, help your fellow human beings, and just be generally cheerful for no real reason. It's the most wonderful time of the year, after all, right? That's why it's been hard for me over the years to explain why I hate New Year's Eve. Now, before you assume that I'm just some miserable party pooper, let me explain. I'm all about the fireworks, the countdown, the resolutions. I even have a collection of silly hats and noisemakers in my closet. My reason for loathing this time of year is a little more complicated than that. You see, ever since I was a little kid, I've always seen something every night on New Year's Eve. No, it's not a magical creature or some supernatural being. What I see is kind of indescribable. Mess is the only word I can use to explain what this thing is. The first time I saw it, I couldn't have been older than 7 or 8 years old. I was standing in the kitchen with my mom as she was finishing making some warm cinnamon buns before we opened a present on the night of New Year's Eve. It was a particularly dark night with not a single star in the sky. I was looking out our kitchen window into the cityscape behind our apartment, taking in the sweet smell of the cinnamon buns as my mom took them into the living room. I was about to turn and walk into the living room when I saw something. There was a figure in the darkness just outside of the city lights. Not a figure, but rather a mess, a dark mess. At first I thought it was an animal, but the way it moved was as if it simply glided over the ground while its dark mass rolled over itself. My young brain was in overdrive trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This was not an animal. It definitely wasn't human. What the heck was it? The more I stared, the more a creeping feeling of dread entered my heart. I began whimpering. I was so afraid and broken at that moment. Then suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my mom. She turned me around and hugged me, asking what was wrong. I couldn't speak. Words could not convey the pure, unfiltered feeling of despair and terror that gripped my young heart. She brought me into the living room and sat me between my father and her, handing me my cinnamon buns. After what felt like hours of being in their warm presence, I started to feel like myself again. The next morning, I tried to tell my parents what I had seen, but they were skeptical. They assured me it must have been a wild animal or maybe just a strange shadow. My dad even took me outside to look for tracks, thinking he'd turn this into an educational moment. But much to his surprise, there were no tracks, even though it hadn't snowed the night before or that morning. He shrugged it off to my eyes, playing tricks on me, and we went inside. After a few days, I had forgotten all about it. That was until the following New Year's Eve. Now let me just say I never believed in any of the hokey stuff from a young age. My parents were always honest with me about the mysteries of life and all that. I lost a grandparent when I was quite young, so death was a concept I understood, and the feelings that came along with it. They also introduced me to the concept of fear pretty early on, in the form of horror movies. They taught me that it was all fake, that these monsters or ghosts were just make-believe. I believed them too, which is what made this so much harder. The following New Year's Eve, I was sitting in the kitchen again. This time, I was finishing a drawing I had worked on to give to my mother for New Year's. She was a sap for that sort of thing. When I had finished, I stood up and stretched while casually glancing outside, and there it was. The dark mass just outside of the city lights, only this time, it wasn't moving. It stayed perfectly still, aside from the dark mass that seemed to continue to flow and crawl all over itself. I couldn't look away. I was terrified, and yet, I couldn't take my eyes off the darn thing. Slowly, that feeling of dread returned. I began to whimper as terror, pain, and despair entered my heart yet again. I started to shake. My whole body was beginning to feel numb. My legs gave out, and I fell to the floor with a crash. My dad came running from the other room and tried to figure out what had happened. I had no words to share with him. I just sobbed in his arms for a while. It took even longer this time for the feeling of dread in my heart to leave. It wasn't until the next afternoon and after a very long sleep that I felt like myself again. My parents were concerned, but they couldn't get a straight answer out of me. I didn't want them to think there was something wrong with me, so I didn't tell them about it. So every year, it's a similar story. The following year, I decided to stay away from the kitchen, but I saw it outside of the living room window this time, just sitting there while its darkness seemed to crawl all over itself. A couple of years after that, I just stayed in bed New Year's Eve night, but that was the worst, because I saw it in my dreams, and when I woke up, I saw its shadow on the ceiling of my bedroom. No matter what I did, I couldn't escape it, and the feeling that it gave me got worse every year. This thing haunts me every New Year's Eve like a bad memory that I want to forget. Just when I think I'm going to go a year without seeing it, there it was. After so many years, I guess you could say I got used to it. I would have that feeling of dread for days after, but it also left me. I'm on my own now, trying to make my way into the world. I have a modest first-floor apartment in a duplex. Nothing special, but it's mine. I stopped decorating for New Year's when I went away to college. I just didn't feel the need to celebrate anymore. No matter how hard I tried, once I saw it, my New Year's was ruined. That thing sucked all the joy right out of me, replacing it with a dark dread. Last year, however, the feeling never left. All year round, I've been living with this constant despair in my heart and numbness in my body that I just can't explain. Food doesn't taste as good. Being around my family and friends doesn't give me the same joy it once did, and physical affection leaves me feeling worse than ever before. I simply feel a deep, numbing despair. I know that it did this to me. I've had a lot of time to think and figure this out as I've been stuck up in my room, waiting for New Year's Eve. The thing that has visited me every year on New Year's Eve ever since I was a little boy, it's a hateful mirror of the world, a living mass of people's darkness, fears, despair, and sadness. Yes, New Year's Eve is one of the happiest times for most people, but for some, there's no worse time to be alive. It feeds off this and sucks the joy from you like a parasite. That's what it is. As to why it's doing it to me, I don't know. But I suspect all these years it's been feeding on me, and now I'm left with no joy of my own. I miss being able to feel genuine joy. It's back now, only this time it's right at my window, looking at me. It's a hideous, writhing mass of darkness pressing against my window. It's hungry. I can feel it. It wants to finish off what's left of me, of my joy, my good memories. I have so little left. I won't let it take them away from me. I will let it starve. To my parents, you were the best mom and dad I could ever ask for. I love you with all my heart. Please know nothing you could have ever done would have changed this, and it's not your fault. I won't let it take what little I have left. This is the only move I have left to fight it. So long. Hello, and welcome to the channel. It's great to have you here. If you're new, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up to show your support. I'm your host and commentator, and I'm excited to dive into today's content. Let's get started. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Enjoy the show. I must tell you about this messed up thing that happened to me last winter. It was colder than a polar bear's toe jam, and I was walking home from my part-time gig at the diner. The snow was piled up like a mountain range, and the streetlights were doing their best to fight the dark. So there I was, trudging through the snow, minding my own business when I saw this weird lump in the middle of the path. Like, what the heck could it be? I crouched down and brushed away some snow, and that's when I saw it. A freaking frozen hand sticking out like it was reaching for help. My stomach did a flip, and I stumbled back, thinking maybe I just found some mannequin hand or something. But nope, this thing was real. I could see the fingers, all icy and blue, and the skin looked like it had been through some serious business. I was about to dial 911 when I heard this twig snap behind me. I turned around, and there he was, the killer, staring right at me with those dead eyes. The dude had a mask on, but you could still see the crazy in his gaze. My heart felt like it was trying to break dance in my chest, and I booked it into the snowy woods. The snow was deep, making each step feel like I was trying to climb Everest in flip-flops. I could hear the crunching behind me, and I didn't dare look back. My lungs were on fire, and I was praying my legs wouldn't give out. I stumbled through the trees, branches scratching at my face like they had a grudge against me. The wind howled like a banshee, and I could feel the cold sinking into my bones, but that killer was relentless, getting closer and closer with each second. I ducked behind a tree, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air. I could see his shadow moving through the trees like some twisted game of hide and seek. My mind was racing, thinking of anything I could do to survive. Then I remembered the frozen hand. I didn't want that to happen to me. I grabbed a rock and threw it in the other direction. The killer paused and looked that way. I took my chance, sprinting in the opposite direction like my life depended on it. The snow crunched beneath my boots, but I didn't dare look back. I could feel his presence like a nightmare chasing me through the icy wilderness. My lungs were screaming, and my mouth felt raw and metallic, as if I had bitten my tongue. But I couldn't stop. I burst out of the trees and into a clearing, my eyes scanning for any sign of help. That's when I saw the distant glow of a cabin. Hope surged through me like electricity, and I pushed my tired legs to go faster. I could hear the killer closing in, his footsteps like a drumbeat of doom. I reached the cabin, pounding on the door. The door swung open, and I stumbled inside, gasping for breath. The person inside, an old man with a long white beard, looked at me like I was a ghost. I blurted out the story, the frozen hand, the killer, the chase through the woods. The old man's eyes widened, and he pulled me inside, locking the door behind me. We sat in the dimly lit cabin, the only sound the howling wind outside. The old man listened intently, his eyes full of a mixture of fear and sympathy. He explained that there had been rumors about a killer roaming the woods, but nobody had seen him until now. We waited in intense silence, the seconds feeling like hours, and then we heard it. The sound of footsteps approaching the cabin. The old man grabbed a shotgun from behind the door, his hands trembling. The footsteps stopped just outside, and the air grew thick with anticipation. The door creaked open, revealing the masked killer standing in the doorway. The old man didn't hesitate. He raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed through the cabin, and the killer ran, the bullet just barely missing his head. The old man called the police, and they arrived to take over the scene. Turns out, the frozen hand I found belongs to one of the killer's victims. The police told me I was lucky to be alive, and I couldn't agree more. I'll always be grateful for the old man's quick thinking and the warmth of his cabin that saved my life that cold winter night. That's my crazy tale of finding a frozen hand in the snow and narrowly escaping a killer in the woods. Stay safe out there. You never know what's lurking. Last winter, as I returned to my hometown during the break, I was thrilled to finally catch my breath and ease up from the stress of university. The prospect of reuniting with friends and family made it the perfect break. Everything unfolded just as I had anticipated. Friends over, late-night video game sessions, and enjoying my parents' beer. It was a time of relaxation and carefree moments. The unexpected turn came about 4 days into the break. One night, I found myself staying up in our living room, engrossed in video games at around 1 a.m. My parents were away, visiting our aunt, leaving me with the entire house to myself. It was an ideal situation, granting me the freedom to be as loud as I pleased and do whatever I wanted. However, that night took a peculiar turn. Our house, nestled on approximately 10 acres of land in a hilly farm area just outside of town, had witnessed a recent snowfall of about 12 inches. While immersed in my gaming and online banter with friends, I heard a faint tap on the window next to the front door. Curiosity getting the better of me, I excused myself from the virtual world, making my way to the front room. The curtains were drawn open, revealing the pitch-black darkness of the snowy night. Initially, nothing caught my eye. Given my stature, 6'1" and 220 pounds, coupled with some martial arts training, fear wasn't the first reaction. Deciding to investigate, I opened the front door after flicking on the porch lights. As I peered outside, my stomach sank. I instantly grasped the gravity of the situation. Footprints led right up to the window where I heard the tap, then veered off toward the back of my house. Without hesitation, I dialed the police, recounting the unnerving experience to the operator. She urged me to stay calm, assuring that help was on the way, though heavy snowfall might cause delays. Nearly in tears, the tough facade crumbled. The thought of someone watching me through my window at night while I was alone sent shivers down my spine. Remaining on the line, I hurriedly secured all entrances, ensuring curtains were tightly shut. The operator advised me to retreat to my parents' room, lock the door, and await the police. Following her instructions, I perched in my parents' room, overlooking the backyard and the forest beyond. What unfolded when I peered outside burned an indelible image into my mind. At the tree line's edge, I spotted a towering figure clad in all black, barely illuminated by the porch lights. In his hand, he held what seemed to be a crowbar dangling at his waist. After an agonizing 30 seconds of eye contact, he turned and vanished into the forest. The police arrived about 40 minutes later, deciding to track the intruder the next morning once the storm subsided. However, their efforts proved futile, as the tracks faded into the forest beyond the tree line, rendering the perpetrator untraceable. To this day, he remains unidentified. From that moment on, my comfort level plummeted when home alone. I insisted on having company, unwilling to face the unsettling possibility of another encounter with the mysterious intruder. There was a long stretch of road that leads directly to the warehouse, and I was worried that it might not be plowed at all, given the state of the main roads. This wasn't a main entrance to the warehouse lot either, but rather a less busy side route that a lot of us drivers frequently used when coming in from the south, as it saved nearly 5 minutes of driving. Turning onto this road, though, I was surprised to see that it was actually plowed recently, with barely any snow on it at all. This was rare because this road only led to warehouse buildings, so it wasn't seen as a priority for plowing companies. Thankful for this, I rolled down the road at a steady pace. I don't remember what I was thinking about. Probably just my plans for the rest of the night after I got off. Out of nowhere, the road ahead was packed full of snow. I slammed on my brakies, and luckily, I was able to stop just before I hit the snow, but it definitely got me awake and a bit dazed. I looked up, and in the headlights, I saw a completely unplowed road for the rest of the way up to the warehouse. I'd never seen a road only plowed halfway with such a sudden stop. There wasn't even anywhere to turn around, so they must have just plowed all the way up here and then backed all the way out. I couldn't believe it. After a minute, I was getting a bit angry. Who would do something like this? I left my van on but got out and looked at the road. It was really cold and snowy, but I could see clear tracks from multiple vehicles. I turned and looked down the road where I came, and not far from the back of my van, I saw something on the ground. I walked over and got a closer look. On the road was a bunch of equipment, like parts to something. I didn't know what they were, but they looked expensive and definitely didn't belong on the road. It seemed like they'd fallen out of a truck that was heading to the warehouse. I got back inside my van and started backing out. At the time, I was telling myself that I was just being dramatic, but I couldn't help but feel like I was in the middle of some weird crime scene. When I made it off the road, I pulled around and drove the extra minutes around to the front of the warehouse and took the main entrance. As I was pulling up, though, my work phone started buzzing. The night manager at the warehouse was calling me, which was extremely rare. I picked up, and they immediately asked if I was okay, then told me to take the main entrance and not the back route. I just said okay, since I was already at the warehouse, but then I went inside to talk to him and figure out what was going on. Apparently, he had just gotten word from a neighboring warehouse that one of their drivers got jumped and robbed on the back road. He said the police were already on their way. Hearing that, everything made sense in my head, and I fell silent for a second. Then I told him what happened to me. It didn't take long for the guys to get caught, though, because the expensive equipment they stole turned out to be highly secured and had internal trackers. It was a group of young men who admitted to making the road into a trap, where they would follow a truck once it turned in and then block their only exit once they reached the dead end. Then, of course, they'd rob the cargo and hold the driver at gunpoint while they did it. I was creeped out for a while, unsure of what to think. I'd never had something like that happen to me before, so it's strange for me to think that if I'd arrived only a few minutes earlier, I would have been caught in a trap and had a gun to my head.